This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people have so much to gain and have such an ulterior motive for putting me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come aboard to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions, Jack. Yes.
Ooh, welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 298. I am your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we have a very interesting little historical dive into the annals of Western leftism.
Yeah.
You could say.
Yeah.
It's of a piece of a few recent episodes, I think. Particularly the Gabriel Rockhill, Western Marxism one. But, that was more about theory, and this is more about praxis, I guess you could say, right?
Yeah, you certainly can see some similarities, even with Rockhill himself and some of these people. But I think not quite. He's not really quite in the class of some of the people we're going to be talking about today.
But they are a special class all their own.
Yes, and they're certainly very concerns with a rigorous class politics.
On behalf of some certain classes, unclear which all the time, but we're going to do the anatomy of a sect today, a little bit, and I think this came to me rather late last week. I think right before we were recording our last episode, about Miguel Serrano, I was just stumbling upon, I think it might have even been from sort of a QAnon exposer, Jim Stewartson, that account, on Twitter, that, sometimes he publishes links to interesting things sometimes, but he's kind of in that Dave Troy nexus of damn, the KGB's just getting the keys to the kingdom, aren't they? Kind of Blue and On slight vibe. Though I think sometimes, they point out at aspects of networks or something in terms of the sinister, features of the Trump milieu. I don't want to say that, all their investigations are off base, but there was an old archived article, a very memory hold article from the blog Washington Babylon, which we'll get to in a little bit, but it was a 3-part investigation from 2021 that Stewartson was using to make a certain point about a more modern sect that we are pretty much all familiar with today on the left. One that we've kind of discussed before.
World,
in the Anglophone Western left. I think for some very specific reason, Jim Stewartson was attacking them in a way that I have to say was probably not very effective, because if you want to come after this sect, you better come correct. If you are a little bit off in your analysis, you're going to get roasted by reply guys.
Even if you're
correct
on point, there's just no way. Yeah,
there's no way. There's no way.
They're inassailable.
It's always interesting when little intellectual or media milieus sort of form and in a way circle their wagons and boost one another, defend one another, and kind of move as this kind of amoeba, this nebulous amoeba that are all kind of interlocked with one another. Their destinies seem to some extent intertwined, the reputational destinies are intertwined, and an attack on one is an attack against all, and must be shut down. Yeah, Griffin says, "Oh boy, this is going to be another controversial SJF." Well, Griffin, I don't know. Well, maybe slightly.
Well, I don't know.
We're just illuminating some like recent and past events of the last few decades that are that we find intriguing and instructive for spotting, I don't know, among other things, insincerity on the left. And
I think it's a very interesting case study in like a phenomenon that is like far too common and really does kind of illustrate points we've made again and again, especially about sort of navigating like the wilderness of mirrors of like sort of the deployment of like the idea of socialism or class politics or communism in this sort of like this in this wilderness of mirrors, in this like discursive abyss, like in the sort of modern like media landscape, and like all these sort of places people go to sort of learn what their ideas should be, or to find like models to imitate, or to search for leadership that we desperately need, right? And it's people can easily get kind of led astray, right? And there is this a phenomenon where you see these sort of appealing terms, this kind of sort of this attractive framework, or these sort of positively valenced ideas that people have these strong positive associations with, kind of being used to mean it kind of just becoming free-floating signifiers that really don't have any relationship to what it is that has caused them to have this positive valence. So
right.
I mean, you can talk about that in terms of LaRouche, etc. And this, I think, is
very big parallels today. Actually, maybe the most direct parallel in terms of like the behavior of the specific English sect. How ironic, right? That they would be so similar to the great hater of His Majesty's Empire.
Yeah, well, you had a great you had a true gemerald before we started recording, where you said, well, there was like an open market niche because like the LaRouche organization, the Five Eyes wouldn't have been able to deploy it in the UK because like the whole
for obvious reasons.
Is that exactly.
It's like when when you set up the whole thing where like the British Empire is the root of all evil and perfidy in the world, then you might need to create your own homegrown British LaRouche organization, maybe, to accomplish the same wrecking and chaos, like, stoking purposes inside of like the British left during like the 70s and the 80s. And that is, according to most people who interacted with this one particular group, exactly what they did. That was like their vibe was, now, of course, we should say it's not just, a LaRouche thing. Well, one thing that this group has in common with the LaRouche is they came out of that great Marxist tradition of Trotskyism.
Yes.
I'm saying that with a little sarcasm because I don't think it's the greatest. But nonetheless, very popular in the West during the Cold War. And, like there were a lot of sects in the US and in the UK, some of which were like maybe even more in the UK were like kind of popular up through the 80s. They had they would do those kind of like rock against racism kind of what was it, workers against racism or something, like the war concerts with the Clash. Like they would sponsor heckin' like leftist punk stuff to go up against the like probably state-backed like right-wing fascio punk that was more dominant. But then of course, as one of the things about trots that is so tragic about them is they love to split over issues, theoretical issues, whatever, over who gets the profits from the newspaper, whatever, like they tend to split very ferociously and then denounce like their previous comrades as like, crypto Stalinists, revisionists, whatever. I mean, other types of communists like have done that too, but the Trots seem to have a particular penchant for it.
Kind of human tendency,
right? Political groups in general, especially ones under pressure. The way most like communists and Marxists were like in the in the Cold War. But then there was one group of Trots in particular that really distinguished themselves, not just in the later decades of the Cold War, but afterwards in the 90s and the 2000s, and even in some kind of roundabout sense, even in the 2010s, and that is a group that, we'll get into like the origins of where they started. I just want to clear up right off the bat, their official name when they kind of launched their their magazine enterprise was the Revolutionary Communist Party, but we should not confuse that with the American Revolutionary Communist Party, the Revcoms, who the Bob Avakian Party, who are also kind of like sus and like weird and occult, but like they're more Maoist, and like I don't know of any like I think the name is kind of like coincidental, I think, of also calling themselves the Revolutionary Communist Party.
Right. It's an attractive kind of name,
Right,
yeah,
right.
Like it's not like super arcane to come up with that.
It's not the most specific one ever. Yeah, exactly. But I was just walking.
And they also call themselves the RCT, the Revolutionary Communist Tendency.
I think that's what they were before they became the RCP. When they first split from I forget if it was like the ISO or another one of these bigger tent like Trotskyist organizations. In the 70s, I think they split over some theoretical issues. And then they were the Revolutionary Communist Tendency, the RCT, and then that eventually evolved into the RCP. And then in, I believe, 1988, they launched, they did have like a new, I forget what their like weekly newsletter was. They were doing that for a little while. But then like they launched this glossy magazine in 1988 called Living Marxism. And this is, this is a edgy, colorful, poppy, like, radical magazine.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah.
And you could find all of their archived issues.
I can just hear like, well, what are you doing? Like,
yeah.
They're doing something. Like they're trying to build like a platform.
Well, you can see the covers that I posted on Twitter to advertise this episode. One is like their first issue that is like. It's something. Let me see if I could pull it up. It's something like Glasnost, like Stalinism in disguise, and it's like a picture of Gorby with like a shadowy portrait of Stalin like lurking behind him. See, that's the kind of trot shit. I mean, for anybody that's not fully caught up, it's basically that like that you can't read a single trot article without like at least one kind of diversionary diatribe about like how Stalin ruined like everything about the Soviet Union, and that's why the Soviet Union sucks and you can't support them anyways. Like even if sometimes there's like otherwise like pretty good analysis, they'll just have to shove in like somebody like is discredited because of like their Stalinist tendency or something like that. Like they take it very personally if anybody has even like critical support for the USSR. Like they get personally pissed off about it. And so it's like even for somebody like Gorbachev, the king of the revisionists, the czar of the revisionists, to be basically saying, nope, same old system.
It's weird in two ways, because like on one hand, it's like, who is your audience for this? That is like, oh yeah, Gorbachev, he's awesome. But also like, no, don't. He's not awesome. He's Stalin. Like, what the hell? Like,
that's like, a very narrow Trotskyist line, because as the kind of main article in that issue, I did read some of it, like as it kind of lays out, this was at a time where there was I think like Living Marxism was aimed at a like left, Western leftist like audience, right? Of like people had some familiarity with like socialism or Marx or whatever, and they're kind of like bemoaning just like how over the moon like Western leftists and soc dems are with like Gorbachev, and like how his reforms are like bold, and it's easy to like it was actually an interesting time capsule, because like this is 88. Like the Berlin Wall hasn't fallen yet. Like it's not clear to anybody that the Soviet Union is going to be gone in 3 years.
Right,
they're being like, oh, he's like reforming it. And like a lot of what they recount is that, the Western leftists are really chalking this up as like a kind of brilliant move for like, it's like finally they can sort of like be nice to the Soviet Union without feeling embarrassed, because of like all the dark authoritarian stuff that was like going on for decades. You know what I mean? Like they really felt like he was putting like a human face on socialism, and on top of that, a lot of leftists were like confidently, according to them, were confidently predicting around this time that like Gorbachev had almost like expertly diffused the bomb that was like the Cold War conflict by making the Soviet Union seem non-threatening to the West, which would undermine like anti-communism, basically, which was like had been ramping up throughout the 80s under like the Reagan and Thatcher administrations, right? You know, like people were and there was a lot of like dread. Also, very easy to forget this now, of like kind of political hopelessness and a worry about people in like across Europe that, you know, if there's going to be an inevitable like showdown between these two countries, like Europe's going to become like a nuclear like wasteland and be like annihilated, you know, in like the opening salvos of this conflict, and like nobody can do anything about it. And it just feels so, you know, black-pilled. I know I brought up before, reading in some article is like, did you know that like the most common motif in like MTV music videos in the 80s, like besides sex, was like nuclear apocalypse, you know? And it's like, there actually were so many like post-punk and like new wave and pop groups that always had these like really, I remember seeing them on VH1 in the 90s when I was a little kid, and not not really understanding like why everybody was so melodramatic in the 80s. It would just
like a lot of war. Like even if it weren't like nuclear annihilation, there would just be like helicopters like flying around, like just people getting like you would see that all the time.
Like shadowy, dark, and these are a lot of like European acts that are like coming over to the U.S. that like we kind of associate the 80s in the U.S. with being very like bright and poppy and Reagan.
Well, I mean, it was also like that time of like you had those like sort of like big epic miniseries like America with the K, where like it was always so weird. Like I think it was 1986, and it was like, oh, you know, what if America got taken over by the Soviet Union? You know, like what if like America just fell and the United States just fell, and like the Soviet Union like you know imposed like you know a puppet government or whatever, like, and the day after was
I was actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the like top editors and writers of the what Living Marxism is now, we'll get to that in a second, it now is called Spiked Online, but I was watching this guy Brendan O'Neill go on Joe Rogan in like early 2024, and like right in the beginning he's talking about well, they're kind of having a weird all over the place conversation about how like they don't trust like government people like warning them about stuff anymore because like everything's so fake. And Brendan O'Neill brings up, he's like, oh yes, like, you know, back in the 80s when I was in school, they forced us to watch this mini series called The Day After that showed a nuclear war, you know, in the aftermath. It was very grisly, you know, very frightening. And you know, we were always learning about acid rain and blah blah blah.
There was a British version of it too, where like it was
I
really
forget
bleak as well.
What was The Day After the American one?
Yeah, I think
okay,
so.
there was a British version. I'm forgetting what the name of it was.
The British one I think was even worse. I forget what the name of it was too.
Yeah, it was really brutal. It was kind of like a Children of Men, kind of like, you know, like horrible dystopia, whatever. Like society collapses. Everyone dies of radiation. And
Threads,
Oh,
Threads.
Okay, Threads.
Yeah.
And he also mentioned like, oh, they would always make us read about these environmental disasters like acid rain. And I actually had a weird flashback to that because I feel like we never heard about acid rain in the 90s. But I think probably in grade school, I had like science textbooks, some of them in like 5th or 6th grade that were from the 80s, right? They were a little bit delayed, right? And I remember like this big section about like the threat of acid rain, and it was like a picture of like a factory in like East Germany and like Poland and like all these Eastern Bloc countries were like, because of their like reckless industrial policies, like now there's clouds of acid rain moving around. I was like, what the fuck? That sounds like kind of a big problem.
I remember we used to get these like little like sort of like kids magazines, like Scholastic would put them out, and they would always have like those kind of science things, and like like a lot of the sort of like pressing issues that they like kind of these would sort of revolve around, or like things that you don't hear about so much anymore, like the ozone layer. I mean, that was like a thing. It was like kind of like resolved. They solved it. And acid rain.
Right.
You would hear about acid rain all the time.
That really fell off though. It's like, what, does China not have an acid rain problem? They have so much production. Like, I don't. Was this like kind of a psyop? Like, you know,
I really don't know.
Just another reason to get the environmentalists
genuinely, like in years.
Like maybe it was a way to get the European environmentalist green type people like more on board with in fact, I remember when I was in Berlin a few years ago, I tried to go to the Stasi headquarters which is a museum. Like, it's still there, and it was like closed that day, but they had outdoor placards, and they mentioned, because this is like a modern Germany, like like it's going to be a certain way, right? Talking about the Stasi or whatever, but it kind of meant, but it also wants to be like nice to like former DDR citizens, and it like emphasized that a lot of the protests that like led up to kind of like the fall of the Berlin Wall and like all that kind of shit in the late 80s were environmentalist like DDR protesters, like who were like Greens basically, that were, I think, protesting things like acid rain and being like, no, you have to protect the environment, but it kind of dovetailed with like heckin' pro-democracy, like destroy communism kind of vibes a little bit, you know what I mean? Like, and then, the German Greens obviously have their own strange kind of history. And you could see that be kind of weaponized. At the same time, I don't know.
Yeah,
these people hate environmentalists.
Through a cursory review, it seems like acid rain is sort of something that was like the pollution aspect of it, like wasn't necessarily solved, but it seems like they developed technology that like mitigates the acid rain element, like specifically.
Okay,
like
they solved
like found some ways to address it. It's not like a solved problem. Like based on my very cursory review, never having like encountered, never had like acid rain since I was like 12. I feel like no one has ever mentioned it to me, but yeah, like apparently it is still a thing, and just from my very cursory investigation, I who knows? I don't know the deep lore on acid rain, but
right.
But yeah, then, certainly these guys would definitely say that it was all bullshit all along, and like, how dare you ever imply that we should do anything to address like any environmental problem, because that's like the nanny state or whatever.
That's a really interesting part of their trajectory, is like, lest we be too hard on the environmentalists. So like, usually I tend to be a little skeptical, like the liberal bourgeois kind of like, how dare you environmentalists at like Davos or whatever. But then when I see these people coming after them, I'm like, it almost makes me live out a little bit and be like, hey, wait a minute. Like, all right. Because like we'll get into it, but like when you see who's funding them in like the 90s and the 2000s, it makes kind of sense why they're so vociferously against any kind of environmentalist, stuff. They even, there was a notorious Channel 4 documentary that they essentially produced and got put on the air somehow, that kind of advances the thesis that environmentalists are the new Nazis, and they're like Malthusians, and like they need to be stopped and everything. It's like even somebody
against
in the chat
nature.
says in the chat says Greens and Joseph Boy's esoteric Nazi connection. I hear you. There is a kind of the deep ecology, that kind of shit. Like there's some kind of stuff there. At the same time, these people are weaponizing it so aggressively, almost in like this libertarian, like, it goes full circle to just being like pro-capitalist kind of like direction.
Exactly, yeah.
That it's pretty sus. Like, so
it's basically like, their whole thing is like I think that there's definitely critiques to be made. However, I also think that like there is like a sort of an environmental problems that need to be like considered and like not dismissed, whereas like their line basically is that like everything should just keep going as it's going, and like the main victims of it almost are like huge corporations who are being regulated, and like our progress is being held back. Like it's
almost
like,
a little accelerationist. It's a little left accelerationist, isn't it?
It is kind of
because they're holding back human progress.
Exactly. We just need to progress, I guess, and then we'll just achieve socialism if we just progress through just
the hellscape,
capitalism.
Just go through the pure Nickland meltdown.
I
actually don't know how close if what overlaps or what extent of overlaps they had with like the CCRU crowd in the 90s, who were also in the UK. Whether people like Nick Land or Mark Fisher. I didn't see any, but I'd be curious to know.
The thing about these groups is that they tend to be like fairly insular, and like the sort of figureheads, like they don't really like to like kind of get involved with like other like similarly large personalities, I find.
Yeah, I know.
Like you kind of like they want them, they kind of have sort of like one guru type of figure, and like they don't, they're okay with having like little acolytes, but they don't really want to like share like intellectual authority with someone like Nick Land. So that's maybe why
big fish
I wouldn't
in a small
expect
pond.
to see that. And also it's kind of like a different sort of like line of interest. It's like a different flavor from Nick Land, I feel like. I mean,
so it ends up in a shockingly similar place, I would say. But maybe different ways of getting there. But should we start with a
Yeah. Let's talk about like kind of where like the story sort of ends, and then maybe we can kind of loop around and talk about how we got here, because it's very like I think that it's a very interesting thing to consider that, like, I mean, you know, it is Trotskyist and everything, so in one level you could say like, oh well, you know, obviously it would end up in this place, but it is kind of interesting to think, okay, well, this is like a left organization, you know, that was called like the Revolutionary Communist Party, and then Living Marxism, you know, like you can almost see something like that happening today, you know, like or like a brand like that having success in the United States or in the UK or wherever today. It's like, oh yeah, like Marxism is like, you know, moribund. It's like, you know, there isn't like it's all online, right? It's not like a real thing. We need to have a living Marxism. You know, you can see like that really being a banner for people to rally around, like if something like that launched today. So how does something with that, you know, sort of verbiage and that kind of framing end up like where a Spiked magazine is now? Because it's a very unique enterprise, right?
Because now Spiked, like if you ask most people who are like aware of it, it's not even, you know, directly that big. I think of like a readership or whatever. It's kind of fallen off, I would say, over the years. But like, you know, some of the big figures that are like the driving forces behind it have podcasts. Like I said, one of the main writers for Spiked, despite them falling off a little bit, got to go on Joe Rogan like a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. And so that actually indicates that maybe, you know, just as they've had a number of sponsors over the years, that it would not shock me, given the overlaps of where a lot of their writers also write, that they might have attached themselves to the SS Teal, you know, Brigada at some point, and are like, you know, a barnacle on like the Tealite cultural apparatus
or something that nature.
Like that.
Like if you like their beats are definitely like kind of very like big favored topics of like some of those, you know, there's definitely like money to be had getting in on some of these lanes, right? Like you know, well, but first I think that like for me, when you said, do you remember Spiked magazine? There was only one thing that came immediately to my mind. And maybe this is the case for some of our listeners as well. I was like, yeah, like I was kind of faintly, I was like sorting it out. I was like, is he talking about Spike TV? Like the channel for men that was on cable, you know, for a little bit. And then I was like, oh, wait, yes, I do. But I only remember one article that was ever in Spiked magazine.
No, and I think is it this one, Khalid, that I'm putting on the screen right now? Because I think it is.
Yes.
It is from July 4th, you know, Independence Day 2019.
Oh, man. Was it
a long
really
time
that
ago?
Long ago?
Like almost 7 years ago.
Whoa, wait. Oh, sorry. Yeah, right.
Almost 7
7
years ago.
Date. Yeah, I was looking at 2010. But
yes.
Yeah. Well, okay, so that's not as long ago as I thought. But yeah, it does seem like forever ago. I remember like when this article came out and like reading it, and I kind of was like, like at the time, but
yeah, I got the ick from
really,
it.
This time. Like we didn't see like how the what is described as the anti-woke quote unquote left in this article would flourish, you know, for or maybe not flourish, how it would wither on the vine, but
right. And I think you know, now this article stands as I would say a cautionary tale for, you know, just because somebody postures, especially at a moment of like peak clout opportunity, to be like a heckin' socialist, but then also says things that sound frankly a little reactionary or fashy, like say the lady on the left here in this picture, the co-host of the Red Scare podcast. Like, you know, like you don't necessarily, you have to kind of like evaluate somebody in a little bit of a broader context than just kind of like taking them at face value and like letting them kind of lie about themselves and what they believe, and like not, you know, pushing back on them. Because not long after this article, like this, we'll read through a little bit of it just to like shock everybody, because
it's like
the way
an amazing time capsule, like it's really
this is one of the most like fascist influencers, I would argue, like today in 2026, and has been that way, I would say, very openly. Probably since about like 2020, 2021, not long after this was written. But the signs were there in 2019 that maybe they weren't just such a cool Marxist. And their podcast was flirting with some very like unsavory right-wing currents under the guise of free speech and being, quote, as this thing says, anti-woke, an anti-woke left.
For access to the full-length episode, subscribe to the Hour of Frequency at patreon.com/subliminaljihad.